up, everyone? Eli Reacts here, the internet's second tiredest music teacher. Today we're coming at you with a unique request coming from the Google form. I had to actually check it out really quickly to make sure it was a legitimate kind of thing. I think it's legitimate, and whoever suggested it may just think it's funny. But I'm going to approach it with some legitimacy here. But we're going to be checking out Musica de LAGOA, which is by Hermeto Pascual from 1985, and it looks like it was part of a documentary maybe, or a film. I'm just going really quickly off what I'm finding on Reddit, but it looks like it is very much part of an artistic movement called Tropicalismo or Tropicalia, which is a fusion of classical Brazilian music and then I'm assuming also some other sort of inspiration. The comment isn't loading entirely on Reddit, which is not helpful, but is what it is. Oh wait, there it is. Fusion of classical Brazilian music, similar to bossa nova mixed with jazz, rock, and psychedelia. So I'm excited. It's from 1985. Less chance of it being copyright hit. So let's check it out and see what good stuff we got going on here. It's a little unhinged to start. Before we get too far into it, though, I think, speculating, what they're doing is kind of getting this airflow going and getting used to the resistance buildup that they're going to have as they're playing these flutes in this upcoming part. So that's just speculation here, kind of figuring out where each one's role is going to land. This is so cool. We've got this ostinato pattern going on that the guy in the middle is doing. And we have this development going on, not only rhythmically, but harmonically. I think also just to mention, like, the amount of control it takes to get for the correct articulation and timing that these other four guys have as they're going through with their blowing across the top of the bottles is just, it's such a minimal thing when you're listening to it, but to get that kind of control of your airflow is really incredible. Yeah, I was going to mention something else about being in the water, but we'll come back to that. And so when we have the flute going underwater, what it's doing is creating this effect of closing off a cylinder. So we have the total length of our cylinder, and it creates, let's say it's not really, but we'll say it's A440. And then as you close that off, then the remaining is going to be at a higher frequency. So the remaining will be left at, let's say, A880. So now it's an octave higher here. And so as the water moves its way up, it's going to force all of the pitches that are remaining that haven't been covered by the hole into a new kind of area, because the air is now interacting differently with inside that tube. So the pitch creates this modulating, changing effect. And then as it exits back out of the flute, outside of that resonance chamber, everything returns back to normal. So I think it's really interesting how he chose to do this performance in the water to facilitate that. And there's different ways you could have done that. There's a visual aspect to it as well in terms of art, but it's really interesting. Let's keep it going. And then I also just wonder if, having gotten the flute wet, especially outside of that tone hole there, if that does create more challenges with maintaining the correct attack of air across the hole in order to maintain embouchure and sound production there with the water. And not being a woodwind person, I unfortunately don't have a great idea, but that's part of my suspicion. So wish I had seen that. That was so cool. You can hear how we're cycling through those overtones. And similarly, navigating a unique approach to sound production through the instrument. Yeah, so my Spanish is not nearly good enough to pick up on what they're saying there. He also said something, though, about Portugal, so it may have been Portuguese. Oh, if they're Brazilian, yeah, they would have been Portuguese. Yeah, if they're Brazilian, it would have been Portuguese. So now they're passing an accent pattern around the circle there. That's one of those things you don't really think about as being something with musical possibility. But as we were listening to that, well, let's cut over to the other part and we'll talk about that. Yeah, let's talk about that. So one of the things that I think is really cool is this experiment. Let's not say experiment. Investigation into more natural types of musical development. And so creating these rhythmic ideas through splashing of water, I think is really cool. It's a medium of instrument that we don't really consider, at least in terms of something of a percussive nature. We saw them doing a lot of work with water across the entire thing, using it to change pitch within the bottles, and then also with the flute. But getting that percussive aspect of it outside of any other means aside from the hands is a really innovative kind of thing to think about in terms of music creation, because we're not listening to music on the radio that's people splashing water in the background and so on and so forth. I mean, maybe there is one or two. I'm just not aware of it. But it's this really cool thing. So watching some of that develop feels very Steve Reich almost. A lot of very accent, or not accent, a lot of very rhythmic based. And he draws Steve Reich drew his from a lot of his time spent in Africa and spending time with the native tribes in country that I'm not going to guess because it's going to be wrong, which then developed a lot of his stuff with the percussion in the early 70s. And so definitely not saying that these people took this from Steve Reich. But this may be just a more unfiltered look into some of the music of Brazil at the time that was able to come forward out of some of the less westernized aspects and become included into this experimental journey into sound and music creation by our composer here, whose name I have kind of forgotten. Oh, Hermeto Pascal. So it's really cool. And then if that whole snippet went a little bit longer, if I was able to loop it, be able to sit down and listen and really bring some stuff towards it. The way that they were adding those accent patterns in, the three guys on the right versus the three guys on the left who were keeping the beat there as they were going through. It's all very interesting. And the other thing that I thought was really cool to see was that the location of recording in the water wasn't necessarily just for, oh, let's just have this in the water and it'll be kind of fun, but it allowed for easier access to pitch changing in the flute, and at the end it allowed for experimental use of the flute in a backwards sort of sense from what we had seen previously. And then it also showed us that the guys doing the harmony there with the bottles, it took a quick look, but none of the bottles were marked. So they very much figured that out in real time before they sat down and actually started playing, which I think is super cool that they were able to pitch those out and work around all of that, probably based on the fundamental of the flute there. And that's where they decided not to do any sort of particular marking to preemptively mark that off on the bottles. So that way they had that, lack of a better term, no pun intended, some fluidity in their selection there. So that was also really interesting to see. And it does provide a different sort of artistic palette visually as you're watching the performance, because they were able to do things visually that they would not have been able to do had they been just seated in a concert hall or seated around a bench outside. So really interesting stuff in this video. I really dig this. If you like this, if you want to see me react to other stuff like this, definitely feel free to drop a suggestion in the comments down below or in the Google form in the channel description. And yeah, till next time, the internet's second tiredest music teacher. This is Elaw out.